morning. Today we'll be reading chapter 7 of The Mouse and the Motorcycle. Where we left off last week in chapter 6 is Ralph is underneath the bed and the maid is coming with the vacuum cleaner. So we were kind of left off with some suspense. So chapter 7 is called The Vacuum Cleaner. From his position under the bed, Ralph watched the tank of the vacuum cleaner being dragged in from the hall and listened to the clash and the clang of the attachments as the maid connected a long metal tube to the nozzle at the end of the hose and fastened a carpet cleaning part to the end of the tube. He heard her humming to herself as she plugged in the deadly machine and began to work back and forth across the carpet. It's nice she's so happy, thought Ralph bitterly, as he watched the hungry machine devour dust and lint as it lay in its path. The maid's feet in white sneakers moved across the room until, without bothering to bend down to see where she was cleaning, she shoved the attachment under the bed. It slid closer and closer to Ralph. To be on the safe side, he pushed the motorcycle further from the reach of the machine, but he dared not take his eyes off the attachment, even for an instant. He shuddered as he watched it gobble dust mice. But even as he shuddered, he was fascinated by the power of the motor. The maid began to sing. The attachment then fell off at the end of the long tube, but the maids, whose thoughts were elsewhere, did not even notice. Now Ralph could feel the machine suck in his breath, and he knew he was in danger of being inhaled along with all the dust. Recklessly, the maid pushed the open end of the tube back and forth in any old way. There was no guessing which way she was going to go next. Ralph had to run with the motorcycle to avoid the terrifying hole at the end of the tube. He ran to the right, to the left, but still the maid pushed the tube around and around, unaware that the attachment had fallen off. Suddenly the maid threw down the tube, but didn't turn off the motor. It landed with a bump and a bounce. Before Ralph realized what was happening, the awful machine had inhaled his tail, and he felt himself being pulled and suctioned across the carpet. "Help!" He could not keep himself from squeaking. But no one heard him from above the roaring of the machine. He just managed to catch the rear wheel of the motorcycle as he was sucked along the carpet. He hung on with dear life. The machine, which was strong enough to suck up a mouse, was not strong enough to suck up a mouse and a motorcycle. Ralph lay there on his stomach, hanging on for dear life, feeling his whiskers and his fur sweeping back towards the machine. From the position on his stomach, Ralph could see the girl standing in front of the dresser. She was smiling at herself in the mirror and arranging her hair, dreaming no doubt of the busboy she was in love with. Ralph was in despair. There was no telling how long she'd just stand there in that silly way, with the vacuum cleaner motor making so much noise. The housekeeper was sure to think that she was busy working. Ralph felt his paws begin to slip. He didn't know how much longer he could hold on. He had to think of something, and he had to think of it fast. With every bit of strength he had left in his body, he clung to the wheels of the motorcycle, and with his left paw, he moved his right paw up to the exhaust. He could just manage to pull himself along until he could get on the motorcycle. Bit by bit, and hand by hand, Ralph dragged himself forward across the exhaust pipe. He knew he was making progress, but he could not see where his tail was. He reached back and yanked his tail out of the tube, only to have it sucked back in again. Ralph was far from being out of danger. The maid continued to sing to herself in the mirror, now pulling her hair behind her ears, and then piling it on top of her hair. Obviously a desperate struggle under the bed she was unaware of. Once Ralph's paws slipped from the exhaust pipe, and he thought he was goner, until he caught the rear wheel just in time to save himself. Slowly he moved forward until his entire tail was free. Things were easier when he could brace his hands and foot against the spokes of the rear wheel. Slowly he rose, clinging and clinging, until he was able to grasp the handle grips and throw his leg over the seat. Ralph felt considerably safer sitting on the motorcycle, and very much pleased with himself for having outwitted the vacuum cleaner. He was quite sure by now that the maid would never bother to look under the bed. He tried to move forward, propelling the cycle with his feet, but found the suction from the motor behind him was too strong. This made him wonder if the motor on Keith's cycle would be stronger than the pull of the vacuum. Before Ralph thought about it, the more important thing was to save himself. No, I won't. I promised Ralph I would not. I promised I would not ride during the day. Yeah, but Keith didn't know what the chances are that his motorcycle would be up against a vacuum cleaner. Keith might be interested to see who would win, vacuum or motorcycle. Wouldn't he? Riding the motorcycle wouldn't be restless, it would be an important experiment. Motorcycle versus vacuum cleaner which would be the winner? Ralph had to find out. The maid turned abruptly from the mirror. Her feet in the sneakers moved across the floor towards the electrical outlet. If she disconnected the vacuum cleaner, there would be no experiment. If Ralph was going to pit one motor against the other motor, he had to do it now. He would never have another chance. Vroom! He picked up his tail, and up he went. He gunned out in one breath. The motorcycle got off faster than he expected. So fast, he lost control. He shot from under the bed, just as the vacuum cleaner was shut down. Suddenly, everything went white, and Ralph found himself bumping along in a strange ghostly place with white made of cloth. It seemed to be closing in around him from every direction. Ralph had ridden straight into the pillowcases that were thrown on the floor. Ralph had no idea which way was out. He got off the motorcycle, and he was beating with his fists. Every which way he struck was soft and white. He stamped his feet only to have it give way beneath him. He began to wade through the pillowcases, tugging at the motorcycle behind him. He wondered why he had thought it was so important to test the motorcycle against a vacuum cleaner. Now he's in big trouble. The light filtered through unknown layers of cloth. And he sank to his knees. When he came to a seam he knew had been wading in the wrong direction. "Ah, drat," he muttered. He turned, dragging the motorcycle. He tried to retrace his footsteps, only to find that he had no idea which way he had come from. There was no landmark. The clouds of cloth were white and billowy, and he'd had no idea which direction was which. Double drat! He stamped his foot, only to find himself sink deeper into the linens. From the swishing sound he could hear outside, Ralph knew that the maid must be unfolding the clean sheets over the bed. He plodded on, dragging the motorcycle behind him, without knowing which way he was going. "He promised to buy me a bunch of blue ribbons," sang the maid, "to tie me up in my hair." Down the hall, the door opened. Ralph heard a muffled woof, and then in a moment the click of the small dog's toenails on the floor out in the hallway, followed by a sniffing that was getting dangerously close. That little terrier began to bark. "I know you're in there," he yipped. "Stick out your tongue and wag your finger at me, will ya?" "You just wait." Paws began to scrape at the sheets and the pillowcase, as if the dog was trying to dig a hole. Ralph decided it was not wise to talk back to the dog at this point. He huddled, scarcely breathing, and he hugged against the motorcycle. "Why, hello, you cute little thing," said the maid, revealing to Ralph that she was even sillier than she thought. If she thought that terrier was cute, she's got to be crazy. The dog went on yipping. A bit self-conscious, Ralph thought, now that he knew he was being admired by the maid. A man's steps came thumping down the hall. "Stop that racket, you pesky mutt," said the owner's voice, and Ralph knew when the bark suddenly came above him that the dog had been picked up. "Let me down! I'll dig him out of there! Just let me down for 1 minute. I'll show you where that mouse is." Suddenly Ralph felt himself being tumbled about in the pillowcase. He didn't even have to think what to do. He automatically grabbed the motorcycle, held on with all his strength. Even though he had been tipped upside down with his feet in the air, he knew that he was being lifted up inside the bundle of bed linens and carried down the hallway. He lay very still, his front paws locked around the front wheels of the motorcycle, waiting to see what would happen next. The maid walked a short distance to what Ralph judged would be the linen room, where he would be dumped into a big pile of bedding that were going to be cleaned. Ralph was deep, deep, deep in the clothes hamper, where there was no light coming through at all. These sheets and pillows and cases were on their way to the laundry room, and since he had no wish to be washed in a laundry machine, any more than he had wished to be thrown out with the trash, there was only one thing he could do: start chewing. Ralph ripped through the pillowcases with his sharp little teeth, and in no time he made a big hole. When he tried to pull the motorcycle through after him, he discovered the hole was too small. He had to stop and chew bigger before he could pull the machine along with him. Ralph chewed through another layer and another layer as he worked his way up, 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 each time enlarging the hole for the motorcycle, but his jaw began to ache, and still another layer and another layer ahead of him. This time a wet towel, which made chewing slow. Ralph was forced to make a decision. Did he want to save his life, or did he want to be carried off to the laundry with the motorcycle? There was only one answer. He wanted to save his life. He must abandon the motorcycle. With aching jaws, he chewed onward, upward, moving fast now, as he was making a mouse-sized holes instead of motorcycles' holes. The bath towel had been left an unpleasant furry taste in his mouth. Gradually, light began to filter through the cloth, and finally, Ralph thought he could not force any more chews out. He came into daylight at the top of the hamper. Whew, he gasped, rubbing his jaws and wading across the sheets to the edge of the hamper. He leaped lightly on the floor, hugging the baseboard, scurrying down the hall to room 215, where he flattened himself, squeezed under the door, safe but exhausted and filled with remorse at the loss of Keith's motorcycle. He dragged himself to the mouse hole to catch up on the sleep that he needed that day.